Hello, US 101 Late Start. So, pardon my voice. I'm telling you, many of my lectures I've made while I have a cold, and somehow it seems like education and having a little bit of a sniffle or a cough seems to go with the career. Whether I'm teaching in person or online. So my household over here, my partner, her and her daughter's been fighting stuff. So I understand a lot of you out here are probably also going through the same thing. Please contact me if you are struggling getting behind. Part of the reasons why I didn't get the Zoom office hours in last week is my household over here was struggling with sickness. I still plan on having Zoom office hours unless all of a sudden I escalate into something worse, and I'll let you know. But I plan on still this week having Zoom office hours. Okay. So having said that, I kind of just wanted to briefly go over some of the approach to some of the topics what we're dealing with here. So I created it also as being optional again, but we're looking at the primary source or text of Frederick Douglass and Emerson. But I'm going to kind of focus more on Frederick Douglass and kind of contrast looking at his work compared to Nat Turner, and then also maybe just to say working with Zen. So for those of us who study history, we are dealing with documents, right? That we're trying to piece together how history, what to make of history. So it's an investigation, is an inquiry, as the Greek word history, defines it. So, okay, so let's take Nat Turner. Nat Turner's rebellion. He's an enslaved black man, and he rebels and he murders a lot of white people in this rebellion. He gets arrested, and he has journalists come in and claim to write down the things that he's saying. It's not clear for us if the source of this information is being made up by the journalist or is actually the words of Nat Turner himself. If we were to know that that's the words of Nat Turner, that would be a primary source. Okay, he's a primary source. And if he was able to read and write, which he wasn't apparently, but if he could write down his own words, that would be the primary text of covering something about the history of Nat Turner. So in this case, Nat Turner might reveal or discuss things about his life or his own views and his own words. And you can incorporate that into the history you make about, like, who is Nat Turner, who was Nat Turner, and so on. Now, you get a journalist who's writing, and seems as the only audience in the room. There's no one outside to be able to say, hey, I see that he's really, writing the information coming from Nat Turner. We have somewhat of a secondary text. It's a secondary source, but in this place, specifically a text. He's writing the Confessions of Nat Turner. Now we have the autobiography of Frederick Douglass, a man who grew up enslaved himself and got out of slavery and was also taught how to read and write, was able to empower himself and tell his own story in his own words. And he would go on tours and he would talk to crowds of people in the public and was able to demonstrate his, that this is in fact him and his life story. So when we're working with the autobiography of Frederick Douglass, is a primary text. It's a primary source document. Now, when Zen, for example, writes about Frederick Douglass, or if you read a textbook about Douglass, it's a secondary source. Okay? So sometimes we as historians, or just anybody in general, as a general rule, okay, so I'll give you an example to keep in mind. I remember when I was younger and I was just exploring how to think about the world. And I thought about all these ideas and these books that people were telling me about. And I was getting secondary sources from all of these, about these characters. So I remember I said, I always heard about the Communist Manifesto. I heard how bad it is. I've heard that everything about it was bad, but what is it and what do I make of it? Now, I remember I sat down and I read it, and it just wasn't what I expected it to be. And I realized that I wasn't even really getting like a hard intellectual critique of it. I was more or less didn't realize that I was hearing so many secondary things, or reading kind of just journals or blogs or people saying, something negative about this ideology that I wouldn't even have been able to define why it was bad. I just was kind of something I was inundated with. And then once I read it, I was trying to figure out what was bad about it. And I realized that it was just, he was talking about class conflict, and he was talking about rich versus poor, and people who own a lot of stuff and people who don't. It didn't seem, it almost seemed like just reality to me. Like I was just shocked when I read it. Now, I'm not trying to pitch the Communist Manifesto on you. What I'm just trying to say, though, is that you do have something, a famous, sometimes say infamous, piece of literature or a story about someone, and you can explore so many secondary sources that you're not able to explain what's there. So now, whether I was going to speak negatively about the manifesto or positively, I know the content and I can at least articulate what's there. I won't lie, I also read, or started to read, not all, of Hitler's Mein Kampf, and it was worse than I thought it was after hearing it. It was a very racist book. That's the primary source. So I was like, okay, there's no misrepresentation that I'm reading about this guy. It's what I kind of expect. So so you're looking at, so as historians though, we're trying to look and see, what are these most solid sources we have to document what history actually took place, right? And this is just something I want you to realize. So now, Emerson, I have us reading. I mainly wanted to get you exposed to somebody who is popular on one level, but also not as much talked about. Maybe not as historically significant in the sense of the bigger topics we're going over, but he is a byproduct of a kind of America's own intellectual traditions and ideas about the world and so forth. And so, again, I want you to just kind of not just do, as you look over this exercise of a discussion about Frederick Douglass and, maybe Emerson, if you decide to write the paper, excuse me. What I'm hoping that you do is you think about not just the content, what you're reading, but think about, put your historian cap on and think about how reliable also is the primary source in the text, right? So, sometimes we have the issue where something is being translated from another language, and that can complicate things because now we're relying on the translator as well. So there's all these different factors there, right, of how we can look at a text and, glean what to make of it in context to the best way we can try to analyze what actually happened in history. So you can see it's not a perfect field. It's, we try to be precise. There's a reason why the citation thing is required. If you write a history book, there's a demand on you to have very precise citations and a paper trail so that the future scholars and serious students can actually zero in and say, is this information really, is it solid? Sometimes you'll also read a book And there's certain areas where the arguments are much stronger, and then another section, the evidence becomes weaker by that particular author. And that's the kind of stuff we analyze in grad school. So I'm hoping that this just kind of helps you think about, on a more academic level about what you're doing and how you're approaching these assignments in class. And I also hope you find them more enriching, on your part too. So, like I said, try to stay healthy, everyone. I'm going to have Zoom office hours again this week. If anybody wants to chat with me or go over any kind of issues or struggles you're having, or just for clarity or just questions about history, I want to encourage you to meet with me. And so we'll be in touch. Talk to you later.